Hey, everybody, and welcome into another installment of the Manely Broncos Podcast. Saddle up with us as Matty Moles and Sayer Bettinger joins the show. Now, what's really cool about this is one of the things that you guys do not know is that in the sole creation of the Manely Broncos Podcast, we were talking about names and throwing around names as far as like what could we possibly name this podcast. Maddie and I had ideas, and we were pitching some ideas off to Sayer Bettinger. And to be honest with you, the sole creator of the actual name, Manely Broncos, was this guy right here, Sayer Bettinger.
Did I really? I don't remember that.
I remember that.
That seems like too good of an idea to be mine. I think.
You remember that, Maddie? I remember that.
I think that was Maddie.
It
was me, but Sayer immediately said, "That's the one." He pointed it out.
That's right. That's how it went. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe
wow. I can't take credit for. I was gonna take full credit for it, Maddie, but I couldn't do that since you're sitting right there.
Anyway, Sayer, how are you doing, my man? You guys can follow Sayer Bettinger over on Twitter at Sayer Bettinger.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Doing really good. It's all things considered, Broncos wise, right? So it's been a tough start to the year, but we keep pressing on. We got 14 games left and they got to be played. So doing good. Thanks for having me on, guys.
It's going to be fun. I think that one of the things that we're going to try and do is we're going to try and treat it that it's not so doom and gloom, because all over Twitter and everything else, it's just, the Broncos are 0-2 again. How can we be patient? We want these instant results. We want this instant gratification, every single week. We want the results. We want W's. And to be fair, we always want wins every single Sunday. We always want wins every single Sunday. But I mean, there's also still the vote of patience and everything else. But it seems like, as we kind of recap what happened on Sunday against the Pittsburgh Steelers, it seems like a constant theme is happening with the Vic Fangio foundation that's being set forth and everything with his team, is that you're looking at it from just the whole rebuilding process, that it's just like, you either win big or you lose big. And for Vic Fangio, everything that we've seen from here forth has been the Broncos have been, losing small. I mean, losing those close games. And I think that going forward and going forward with this team, that's just going to bode them incredibly well going forward, especially with a young team that they have offensively and then the unit that's gelling defensively.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, if you think about it in any sort of reasonable way, 2 years ago in 2018, the Broncos were getting absolutely destroyed in a lot of games. And even last year in a few games, they got absolutely destroyed. So you hate to lose, but I mean, you're losing by 5 points or less against two teams that are going to be playoff teams this year, most likely. The Titans most recently, in the AFC Championship game, as people have talked about. So it's one of those things where, yeah, the Broncos have been rebuilding. This is year 3 of a total rebuild. I mean, John Elway didn't come out and just flat out say, yeah, we're gonna, kind of dismantle everything and really rebuild, and we're gonna start from scratch. He didn't say that specifically, but you can tell. I mean, the Broncos have been collecting draft picks. They've been developing young players instead of making a ton of big free agent signings, and we've seen the fans' frustration with that too over and over again every spring when Elway goes out and makes his kind of modest free agent moves, or, kind of those sneaky trades like the Bouye trade and the Jarrell Casey trade. Certainly not low priced players, but at the same time, like, it's not the Peyton Manning, Emmanuel Sanders, DeMarcus Ware caliber of moves. And so you have to expect to round out all of what you just talked about, Cameron. Like, this is a team that's so young and so inexperienced, and for them to have that combination of youth and inexperience, and then to suffer all these major injuries on top of it, to be losing by 5 points against the Pittsburgh Steelers is actually quite commendable. If you're looking at it from a league wide perspective, and so obviously us as Broncos fans, we want to see them win right now, and I want to see him. I want to see him kick Tom Brady's butt this weekend. But does that mean that there's not evaluation things that we can do? I don't think so. So I'm excited, man. I think we've seen so many good things.
Yeah, I mean, this game could have gone a lot worse. And honestly, I know I picked 27-20 as the final score. I was kind of close, give and take a point on either side. But, we fell down early and the team sustained the Locke injury, sustained the Sutton injury. That's a lot of leadership. Even though they're young, that's a lot of leadership our squad lost. In comes Driscoll that I think got like 0 reps with the first team or whatever during the week, and actually played the part well. I know we've got some quarterback news that we'll get into in a bit, but I gotta commend Driscoll on how he played. I mean, he was a baller. He took some shots and stepped in and delivered some balls right on the money. Kept us in that game. Unfortunately, we had a 3rd and 2 in a 2-down territory and couldn't pay it off. But overall, something that doesn't get looked at is this was on the road, right? It's Big Ben at home. I know that the crowd wasn't in it, but still, like, it's still traveling in the NFL. It's still not sleeping in your same bed. It's still at least half a day of travel time that you're not getting rest or that you're, doing other things that are travel related. And there's something to be said about going to work the next day after sleeping that night in your own bed, right? And so, like, home games are still home games, even if it's not with as many fans. Now we'll have 5,700 fans or something like that this weekend. So hopefully, not all the noise is artificial, but I really have a lot of positives to take away with how we dug in and we didn't quit after getting down 17-3. And we just fought and actually had a chance to go win that game. It could have gone either way. So that's, this week the offense had a chance to get it done and couldn't. Last week the defense had a chance to get it done and couldn't, but they had a chance to get it done late in the game against 2 pretty solid teams after losing loads and loads of leadership. I mean, the Vaughn news came out like a week before kickoff, right? Like, it came out that week. The leader of our team went down, right? We didn't have Sutton for game 1. We barely had Sutton for game 2, and Locke went out. Like, a lot of young guys are having to step up into a leadership role. And I don't think a lot of people are talking about that. I mean, the coaching staff deserves some kudos for sure for how those guys are fighting. But the guys got to believe in the person next to them, and they got to have somebody that's leading them on the field. And so I'm excited for what that looks like moving forward.
And even too, if we're talking about a young team, I think especially with Jeff Driscoll and with a bunch of the young weapons now that we have on the offensive side, with guys like Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler and these guys, we're talking about a quarterback in Jeff Driscoll that has had a lot of just, rapport and chemistry with these guys in training camp already. So, I mean, if we're being honest, Jerry Jeudy probably had the majority of his reps with Jeff Driscoll. There were some times as the camp was getting ready to wind down where Drew Lock was starting to kind of, get that chemistry with him and everything else. But as far as like the true chemistry early on and maybe even entirely into training camp, it was really Jeff Driscoll. And so I think that especially on the offensive side, that should bode well on the offensive side. And honestly, if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, like emotionally, I'm probably at least a little bit deflated a little bit because you had Jeff Driscoll and the Broncos offense put 21 points on you. Now, granted, Jeff Driscoll, I don't believe the Steelers played the Lions last year and at that particular point, if they did, it was probably with Matt Stafford at quarterback, and Driscoll at that point in time near the end of the season proved that he was at least a very capable player, capable quarterback that can come win games. But I think that for Driscoll, the really impressive thing was also just how Pat Shurmur really handled that whole situation. I could probably sit here and say that I could probably scratch my head a little bit and probably say, why didn't Shermer do exactly this exact same thing with Drew in the first few possessions and everything when Drew had the ball. But it was still really impressive for Shermer to really orchestrate it and really give Driscoll those confidence short intermediate throws. And then in the second half, what did we see? Noah Fant just continue to go off and just really emerge, and already after week 2 almost be close to 200 yards, which potentially we'll see. He's going to have a little bit of a problem with maybe some of the linebackers this weekend with Devin White and maybe Levante David, but I mean, he's really close to 200 yards already, and it's almost after week 3.
Yeah, it's exciting to see the way Driscoll played, like you guys are talking about. I mean, quite frankly, I mean, if you're just comparing week 1 and week 2, I mean, Driscoll's throws were, in my opinion, better than what we saw from Drew Lock. I don't think Driscoll is ultimately going to be better than Drew Lock by any means, but if you're putting it in the 2-week vacuum that we have, I mean, the touch that Driscoll put on the Cortland Sutton deep throw down the right sideline, the Melvin Gordon touchdown, the really long throw to the sidelines to both Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler. You watch those plays and you're like, wow, that's the backup quarterback. I mean, not to continually hype up backup QBs, which I know that the Denver Broncos fan base is notorious for doing. But I mean, we're also sitting here heading into a game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I wouldn't say that we saw anything close to what we saw from Driscoll from guys like Brandon Allen, previous backup quarterbacks, and I've talked about it all offseason. I'm predominantly Orange. You guys have seen, and maybe some of you listening have read about it too, but Jeff Driscoll to me is kind of the ideal backup QB type in the fact that he has a couple of top-notch traits. He may not be, the greatest in the pocket like we saw against the Steelers, but he's gonna have one of the strongest arms out there, and he also is very mobile, very comparable athletically to Drew Lock, actually, if you look up their combine numbers and everything. So Driscoll's a good athlete with a strong arm, and those are 2 traits that you can win with. You can make those kind of big chunk plays, and that's why the Broncos stayed in the game, just flat out. You don't stay in the game without a 19-yard reception by KJ Hamler, without the 40-yard play from Sutton, and those all these different types of things factor in, and Driscoll was part of that. He put throws on the money deep downfield, and to some tight windows as well. So the particular throw that is really impressive, you go back and watch it. Jerry Jeudy's crossing the field, headed toward the far sideline with Driscoll drifting to his left. And Driscoll makes a throw on the move to his left, which is across his body, moving in an awkward way. And he leads Jeudy to the sideline perfectly and makes this tight window throw. It's a throw that, I mean, again, I'm hyping it up because you don't see it too often from a lot of guys. But I mean, I have significant hope with Jeff Driscoll going forward. I think that there's reason to believe, based on what we saw against Pittsburgh, that the Broncos can win games in Drew Lock's absence, and hopefully it's not as long as 5 weeks.
Right. And I think too, one of the key things is that while the Broncos defense, I think they've not exactly hit its stride yet, but the impressive thing is they've really become this really elite bend but not break defense right now, to where they're really giving up the yardage. But once they get into the red zone, there might not be a better defense that you want to face or even want to face at all in the red zone. I mean, and I think that and I heard Louis Riddick talk about it a lot in the Monday night game, just how that is just a true staple of a Vic Fangio defense. And we say it so often too, with it being red zone, the yardage and the ability for an offense, it gets shrunk a little bit. And so I think that it just really helps out the advantage of a defense, in particular Vic Fangio, because you have a lot of people that are really disciplined. They understand their responsibility. And I think that one of the biggest surprises, and give or take, it is like the first handful of weeks into the season, but as far as a huge surprise, I will say that Josie Jewell has been a very big bright spot to really kind of combat the linebacker next to him with Alexander Johnson. It's been really kind of a nice little breath of fresh air.
Yeah, I mean, our run defense as a whole has been really good. I mean, really, Connor got loose for that one long run, but we really had him bottled up pretty much all game. His overall average at 6.6 looks good, but I mean, he had a 59-yard carry. So, 15 carries for, 40 something yards, 47 yards or whatever it would end up being. Like, that's pretty stinking good. It was pretty much, it had to be Big Ben. He threw 41 times in the game. Decent overall rating, but, Tannehill tore us up a bit, and that's to be expected, right? Young and experienced secondary, especially with the injuries that we're sustaining. But it's one thing to get beat at something that people think that you're going to get beat at. It's quite another to let that leak into all aspects of your defense and to overcompensate. And we know who we are, and we're going to force you to throw the ball. And hopefully, Ojemudia has his opportunities to step up and get an interception. I'm really glad to see Simmons bring one in this week when he had a chance last week. So, I mean, things are starting to look up. At least if we get turnovers, it kind of neutralizes that. But, man, a good defense, they start with stopping the running game and making teams one-dimensional. And if you make teams one-dimensional, you can at least scheme other things and try to be in the right spot and take guys away and maybe say, okay, if we're going to get beat, it's going to be, wide receiver 3 that beats us this week, and they're just going to have to do that. And if they do, I'll shake their hand at the end of the game. But I'm not letting Derrick Henry beat me. I'm not letting James Conner beat me. I'm going to make the rest of the offense have to click, and we're just going to go from there. And, oh, by the way, now that we have a backup quarterback, maybe we can get in a rhythm and do things, but we're going to be able to hopefully, we stop the run and the other team is able to either they score quick or they get off the field quick, and that helps our defense out a little bit. And even if we do have a couple of 3-and-outs on the offensive side, it's not going to be as bad because they're not gashing us for 7-8 yards a carry on first down and constantly getting ahead of the chain. So I really do like that fact. That's the biggest difference to me is those games you're talking about earlier. A couple of years ago, last year, definitely if you go back to even the McDaniels years, right? Teams were able to just run the ball right down our throat, and we couldn't stop it. And that's not the case with this defense, even with having some of the key injuries that we've had along our defensive line and our front seven in particular. So very, very impressed with that. Josie Jewell has a huge part to play in that. But also Johnson has a huge part to play in that too. If homeboy could just avoid getting penalties on interception plays, I think we'll be all right.
That would be nice, right? Yeah, I think, it's interesting that Ojemudia has had such struggles, and the fact of what difference would it have made if he had picked off, or if those 2 interceptions that he could have had, would have stuck, and how different the rest of the game would play out. And the Chase Claypool touchdown that he gave up, a little bit of a questionable arm bar there from Claypool, but not bad enough. I don't think I saw a lot of Broncos fans saying that was definitely offensive pass interference. I think he got Ojemudia on that one pretty clean, but that's just my opinion of it. But Ojemudia's better days are ahead, no doubt. I was telling the guys on Broncos Country Tonight, is that what it's called?
Yeah, on 850 away.
Yeah, on 850. Yeah. I was telling our boys Ryan and Benjamin that, Ojemudia, I don't think I ever saw him play this good at Iowa. And I think that obviously he's had some rookie struggles and he played well at Iowa, but I mean, he's making some plays on the ball that, shoot, I don't remember him being that kind of guy who could dive after an interception like he did in week 1 against the Titans. And then him being in such great position on that play against the Steelers to be able to intercept that pass. He was just basically playing wide receiver. I don't remember those kind of plays from him at Iowa. I remember him more for coming up against the run and making some big sticks. But so I'm excited to see Ojemudia continue to develop, and the coaching staff putting their confidence behind him, and Vic Fangio really acknowledging and just saying, look, yeah, he had a tough game, but he's going to come back out there and he's going to go at it again. And Ojemudia too. I mean, he's ticked off after the game. That's what I like to see. I don't like seeing guys who wallow in something, or stay kind of silent. I like seeing when guys are, they're attacking it. They're the kind of guys that want to stay out on the gym. I remember, like when Kobe Bryant did that one time, or maybe he did it multiple times, but he stayed out on the court until the wee hours of the night after, missing a bunch of shots or losing a game or something like that. And just willing wins to happen. That's what this young Broncos team is going to have to do. You've heard all the players talk about it. We're going to have to make that one extra play. We're going to have to make that one extra, whatever, that one extra turnover. These guys have got that factor about them, and I love seeing that, and I love hearing that after games.
And, I think that one of the impressive things was that despite some of the drops and everything that we had seen from Jeudy, he still is managing to perform really well. I mean, and I think that, that's the area that has been so promising with Jeudy. And it was one of the things that we had touched on last week. After the game, when Jeudy made the statement, what was the biggest takeaway you were going to take, you took from the Titans game? And it was the 2 drops. And we had mentioned with Patrick Coyote and Zach Seegers, that I think has a lot of positives, but at the same time it has some negatives, because you don't want those 2 words to just continue to linger in your head mentally, so that those things just always linger, and then that's the only thing you're focusing on, thus resulting in like incomplete passes, drops, whatever, what have you. But no, it just, whether Jeudy drops a pass or not, he comes and he bounces back and gets a highlight play, gets a big play. He's clearly being more focused and everything else, especially now with the drops, kind of just seems like it's kind of on the back burner after week 2.
Yeah, it's exciting to see. I mean, you hate to see guys drop. He dropped at least one more pass against the Steelers too, and it is what it is. I mean, it's not going to be a thing that even if he has double-digit drops this season, I mean, it's not going to be a thing where we go into next year like, oh man, is Jerry Jeudy going to struggle with dropped passes? I mean, remember last year when a lot of fans on Twitter were cutting Noah Fant for drop passes, and now people are saying he's the best player on the offense. And it's like, well, that's interesting that just a year ago you were cutting the same guy that you're now saying is the best player on your offense. It's like, that's why I said a couple of days ago on my Twitter page, like, this Broncos team deserves your patience. It's as simple as that. They're young, they're talented, they're good. And for fans to be sitting there treating this 2020 team just like the Paxton Lynch led or the Trevor Siemian led or the Brandon Allen or Joe Flacco led team or the Case Keenum led team.
Wow.
It doesn't make.
Get rid of the. What are you doing with the carousel right now, Sayer?
I know, I'm bringing it back.
The carousel.
I was making sure I could get every single name in there. I was kind of thinking as I was going right there, make sure I didn't miss anybody. But you guys know what I'm saying. I mean,
yeah.
You can't treat this team the same way as those teams, and you can't say, well, the Broncos haven't been in the playoffs for 5 years. They need to get there now. That doesn't make any sense at all. When you finally found a formula that works, you have to wait for that to develop properly. You wanted the team to draft homegrown talent. You wanted John Elway to find a QB in the draft, and now you're not willing to wait for it. And that's the crazy thing. And I know you guys, we have that in the show later to talk about a certain quarterback that fans are already calling for, but it's just insane to me that this fan base, I get it. Everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to see the Broncos back in glory, but we had to all realize that this year, the best case scenario was a wild card spot among those 7 in the AFC. That's always been the best case scenario. And worst case scenario is probably what we're looking at right now. And that's very unfortunate. But at the same time, I mean, Drew Lock is going to be back at some point, and we're going to get to see what is this team capable of doing with him at the helm. And that's what we need to be focusing on right now. Not, we need to get back to the playoffs. We need to be able to beat the Chiefs. We need to be able to beat the Raiders. All this, et cetera, et cetera. It's not the way to go about it.
Well, and two, of course we want to beat Oakland. Like, of course we want to go back to the playoffs. Like, of course, like we would, and it's like what we were saying, like we want to win every single game. But at the same time, you have to take your lumps. You have to understand that about the average age of the team and the average youth of the team, and just understand that you're going to take some lumps. You're going to be taking these games where, just they may not be hitting their stride yet. And so you have to be patient with every single moment, every single game, especially in the year that we're in right now, 2020. I mean, of all the years, when fans are, been dying for football, I mean, you absolutely have to take this type of year, especially with patience. And obviously there's just a lot of outlines and a lot of things that certainly come with the 2020, like Driscoll and everything else, of him potentially being as what we had called the quarantine quarterback, and everything. So, I mean, and I think that just overall, you have to just kind of just really do be patient, because I think for Broncos' sake, they really have been spoiled. And I think that they've been spoiled to the point where they just want to win a Super Bowl every single year. Now, granted, who wouldn't? But, again, you just have to just go with the process, go with the flow, and just go with the rebuild that we're seeing with the Broncos right now, just that youth movement. And so now, all in all, with the Steelers game, kind of going back to the Steelers game, who are some of your game balls that you guys are handing out for this Steelers game? Who are some of your game balls?
I'll go first. I'll say Simmons. He had a big-time bounce-back game. He was all over the field. He led the team in tackles. He got the interception. He had 2 passes defensed. I mean, he really stepped up as the leader of our defense. We needed him to. There were some matchup issues that we had, but it was to be expected because they have a lot of talent on that side of the ball and they spread you out. And we have a lot of youth in our secondary. But Simmons, he played like a franchise-type defensive back, a guy that you pay big money for an extension to. He didn't play like that game 1, and he'll probably be the first one to tell you he didn't play like that in game 1. But big time rebound for him. I know some other guys are softballs, but I had to give Simmons some credit here because I was pretty critical of him after game 1. And I'm always willing to give props when guys rebound and they perform like they should. So good job, Simmons. You get my game ball. Not like that means anything to you, but you still get it anyway.
Yeah, I would definitely – I kind of go out of left field with this one, but I would say KJ Hamler. I mean, I don't know that anybody on the offense stood out other than Noah Fant more than Hamler did watching back the game a couple of times, especially when you turned on the coach's film and to see the way that he runs routes and the toughness. I can't remember who took the mic today. I think it was Tim Patrick was on the mic for the Broncos today. Well, when we record the day that we're recording this, which is Tuesday. And Tim Patrick took the mic and said that the trait that stood out to him the most about KJ Hamler was the toughness that he played with. And I think that says a lot for a guy who, dating back to, January, February, I don't know how long at Penn State he was struggling with the hamstring injury. And for him to come out and re-injure it at training camp, and then your first game back on a quicker timeline than we were given, to play 48 snaps at full speed, and to mix it up with the defensive backs, and then to catch 3 passes for 48 yards. He was open every play that any play that he was running a route, he was open. And it's so exciting. You hate to lose Cortland Sutton because I want to see all 3 of those receivers, Sutton, Judy, and Hamler out on the field. And we're being robbed of that, unfortunately, this year. But man, with Hamler and Judy, we can sleep at night knowing that we have 2 receivers who, that's a hard position to play coming from college to the NFL. Those guys are NFL ready wide receivers, and they're going to make a huge impact over the course of this year. So KJ Hamler's got my game ball, 48 snaps off a hamstring injury. That's big time.
Two things that translate well to the NFL game from college is speed and toughness. And it looks like he's got both in spades. So good pick.
Yeah, and route running as well. And I think that, one of the things that just had been, especially going back to his Penn State days, was we were talking about toughness. He really had that toughness even at Penn State, and just at such a young age, when you really have that type of toughness, we saw it a little bit on a throw that it wasn't perfect. It wasn't a good lead throw, but it was a pass that Hamler kind of reached back and went across his body for that catch and took a shot like over the middle, and he really showed that toughness. It wasn't exactly, I think Sayer remembers the play. It wasn't exactly like the Maryland game, where he took it was like the pass or something in the middle of the field and he got blown up and he almost fell to the ground. But no, he stayed up, and I don't know if he went for a touchdown on the play but it was just a big gain on the play. But he clearly has shown that type of toughness going forward and even with his college days. And so I kind of always equated him that his highest ceiling is kind of like a Steve Smith guy, because everybody wanted to really kind of coin him as potentially like a Deshaun Jackson or someone like that. But if he could be like that Tyler Lockett with more of that Steve Smith type toughness, I mean, they're going to be a pretty tough team to beat, especially with that type of speed that you have to keep and be honest as far as the defense and all that. I think for me, I'm going to just continue to give out the game ball right now to Garrett Bowles, man. For as much of the heat that he's been taking and everything else, if you were to tell me, and it's not to say that I've doubted Bowles' talent still and everything else, because I think Bowles is incredibly talented, and there's been no question about it. But if you were to tell me that Garrett Bowles, just even 2 weeks into the season, would be their best offensive lineman, I don't know if I would have, I would have been rather surprised by a comment like that, just because of what we had seen and everything else. But if you look at it, Bowles was, for a second week in a row, the best offensive lineman in back-to-back weeks. And, that says a lot. Now, there's going to be certainly a lot of help that it's going to have to come on that right side with Elijah Wilkinson. And so the coaching staff's going to end up, even though Fangio said he's not sure whether or not that Dotson will get some reps there at right tackle, it seems like Wilkinson's still going to end up being that guy. We still don't necessarily know whether Dotson will see playing time or not, but that right side is going to end up needing the biggest help. But if you're looking at it from the Bulls' perspective, he gets my game ball, entering here on week 2.
That's solid. I mean, I was also very, very critical of Bowles pretty much all off season. So much so I was on team take a tackle. And I was pretty adamant about that. I still, stand by that. But maybe that tackle would have been playing on the right side right now, because, oh my gosh, for perspective, the Broncos have a fairly decent defense. Have a couple of guys that can get after the passer, and they had 3 quarterback hits. Granted, I know it's a good offensive line, but if I told you that we had 19 quarterback hits going into this game or going through this game against Pittsburgh, which those guys, they don't hit with soft pillows, like it's a Mack truck hitting you every time, I would have said, how many quarterbacks did we actually go through? So that shows the toughness of Driscoll for sure. But the fact that most of that pressure, all of that pressure did not come from 72, and we only heard one time holding number 72 all game. Bowles, man, you're working your way into a nice contract. As scary as that is to say, somebody's going to pay you a nice contract if you continue playing like this the rest of the season.
You had touched a little bit on pass rush, and real quick before we go into our next segment about the new quarterback that's in here and with the injuries and tank for Trevor, you had mentioned pass rush. You had mentioned pass rush, Maddie. Let's go to the defensive side. I think that if we're going to try and put a final bow as far as maybe one of the most disappointing things with that whole defensive side, that Steelers offensive line on the right side was banged up. I mean, it was rough. And yet we once again didn't see Malik Reed's name called at all. We didn't hear his name called. And Jeremiah Tachu, it seemed like he was rather quiet. We saw early on that they were going to move Bradley Chubb around and actually move him to the right side, but it just seemed like the pass rush, from what I had seen, was left a lot to be desired. So I asked the question, Sayer, because we've talked a bit about it on Slack, and we've seen it all throughout Twitter, and Maddie, you can weigh on it as well too. Is this time? I mean, do the Broncos need to start going after these guys like Cameron Wake, T. Sizzle, and Clay Matthews again?
I definitely don't think it's a bad idea. I mean, but I think you got to start winning a couple of games, and Chubb not being 100%, that's going to have a domino effect on everybody. And Chubb's still setting the edge really well. I mean, man, that guy's tough. And we saw him play through the ACL tear in Jacksonville last year, or against Jacksonville last year, rather. And the fact that he was just abusing the Jags left tackle in that game with a torn ACL is indicative of his toughness. But once Chubb gets going, I think it's going to have a domino effect on everybody else. Right now, it's just tough sledding for him, and teams know that, and teams can slide protection over to him, and they know that they can win a lot of one-on-one battles with Malik Reed and Atachu. So I honestly would go after one of those free agent pass rushers, but that's kind of just where I'm at with it. But I also can see, when Chubb is fully healthy, I think that Reed and Atachu, those guys are going to be a lot better for his, just with him getting healthy, getting his confidence, getting his ability to bend the edge. He's been close a couple of times to, probably at least 2 or 3 sacks that I've seen. He's been really, really close, fractions of a second away. And I think he's going to get there sooner than later. So maybe against Tom Brady. I don't know. We'll see. But you'd love to see that for sure.
Go ahead, Maddie, if you have got something.
I'm torn, right? Because I'm a realist. We started 0-2. We've got injuries up the wazoo. Do I want us to be competitive this year? Sure. Do I want us to use valuable dollars this year when we could roll those over to next year and use them for a team that might be more competitive? I think like that's a more wise way. I guess that's a more intelligent way to use your resources. It's being a better steward of it if you're looking at long-term competitive potential. But man, it sure would be nice to have Clay Matthews and his 8 sacks from a year ago coming on the opposite side of Bradley Chubb and being able to take some pressure off of him for sure. I'm really torn, right? Because we want to develop our young guys, and having talent around them puts them in a better position to succeed. But I would say this, like, maybe consider it more if we win this weekend. If we drop to 0-3, like the statistics show, even if you rotate that over for potentially 7 teams in the playoffs, it's really tough sledding the rest of the season. And we still have the Chiefs twice. We still have the Raiders, who looked really good last night, twice. We still have Justin Herbert and the upstart Chargers, and I think that they're going to turn the corner. That offense just has a lot of potential with Herbert under center. So, and of course that secondary is still good even with Derwin James out. So, like, I don't know. That's a long way to say I don't know. I would say not yet. If we can get to 1-2, I would look at it harder going into week 4.
I think for me, it would just depend, to what you were saying, Maddie, it would just depend on what happened in the Tampa Bay game. Because in the Tampa Bay game, if Malik Reed and Jeremiah Atachu, combined for 3 sacks, and then you get, Bradley Chubb chipping in for maybe a sack and a half, and then some pressure up the middle as well. If they're generating, maybe 7-8 sacks on Tom Brady on Sunday, then I will say no. I would not go after a potential pass rusher, because too, the offensive line for Tampa is not that bad. They got the weapons and everything else. I think that would be it for me, is that if it's the same show and everything else where they just don't show up, and they do win, the Broncos do win, then I would say that, yeah, that's probably worth going out and grabbing someone and kind of addressing that pass rush need. But moving on to the elephant in the room, which is talking like all three topics into one. You have the injuries, you have the new quarterback in the room, the franchise quarterback. I'm kidding, but you have Blake Bortles now entering the discussion and being a part of the Denver Broncos roster, and then of course the topic that has been thrown around, of course, with the tank for Trevor Lawrence discussion, which probably might be our most lengthy discussion, of the pod. But let's start first with the Blake Bortles news and the injury news.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't feel like it was that long ago that we were. Well, I know for me, I was rebuking any rumors that John Elway was going to trade up from the 31st pick in the 2014 draft to try to get Blake Bortles. Not because I didn't like Blake Bortles necessarily, but just because we still had Peyton Manning and we still had Brock Osweiler at the time, and it just seemed like a waste of time to me when there was other ways you could address the team, and they ended up getting Bradley Roby anyway, and the Jaguars took Bortles, and all the rest of that is history. But it's just funny how fast time flies, and now Bortles is in, and I'm most disappointed by the fact that I just learned that the Bortles Facts Twitter account is deactivated, or it hasn't been. They deleted all their tweets, and yeah, they did. They've shut it down. So maybe if Bortles gets a chance to start, that will get revived, and we'll get some great facts about how, Blake Bortles, he's one of my favorite ones is the rushing yards with Emmitt Smith. Like he needed like 16,000 rushing yards to be the NFL's all-time leading rusher or something. It was great. That's great quality Twitter content. But yeah, it's interesting, man. Bortles, they tried to get him last year. They apparently tried to trade up for him in the 2014 draft. Clearly there's something that they like about him. And I like the video that Cameron posted about him, just knowing what Blake Bortles does right away every morning is the same thing that I do. It's great. So we're very really rolling.
It's very Jay Cutler video-ish. I mean, if just cut to the chase, we're what we do every morning. Yeah. I think that it's a very interesting move, but it's not one that will kind of lead us towards this other topic, of course, which is Drew Lock. It's not one by any stretch of the imagination that should ever make Denver Broncos fans and everything else think that Drew Lock is not the guy. I mean,
it's horrible that you have to even say that.
I know, and I have to say it just because it's Twitter, and at least one person of the billions and billions of accounts that's on Twitter will at least have that thought that Blake Bortles is coming in and potentially supplanting Drew Lock at some point. But I mean, it's just a very fascinating move. And I guess the only thing you could really say is probably two things. Do they really have enough faith in Jeff Driscoll? And do they even have enough faith that Drew Lock will be ready? Now, they did not put him on IR on Tuesday. They did not put, and this is probably the more interesting thing, was they did not put Lock on IR. And we know that in this year in 2020, the minimum weeks to go on IR is 3 weeks. And the injury that had been reported for Lock was 3.5 weeks. And so maybe the whole intention for the Bortles signing was just to be that veteran presence and be there with Shermer and be that extra voice to help Lock really kind of grow with Shermer's offense and really learn that offense. And I think I had texted Sayer, I believe it was today or a day ago, I forget, but it was kind of like, it's almost like the same thing happening with Scanzarello, right? With Lock's injury, that you never want to get injured, right? But and live reps trump everything. But it seems like that still the best case scenario for him, and in a year of 2020, the best thing for him would be to really soak in that offense and really soak in that playbook. And then come in 2021, we could see Lock in just that second year of a system really just be understanding of what that Shermer offense really is.
I think there are a lot of different angles to take with this, none of which being Bortles is going to be a replacement for Locke.
Exactly.
Bortles will be a force multiplier for Locke. Like he'll help Locke, with weekly prep and stuff later in the season when Locke comes back and all that stuff, right? But there are a couple of insurance scenarios and best case scenarios for us to look at this. Number one, if Driscoll's not the guy moving forward, at least to replace Locke, we have a legitimate answer, right? We have somebody, maybe it's going to take a week for him to come in and get ready. But who knows? Maybe he crushes a beer on the sideline and just goes out and throws for 300 yards, on Sunday. Like, who knows? But like, Driscoll's going to get a shot this weekend. From everything I've been able to see, it's going to be Driscoll with the start this weekend. You say live reps matter, right? Live reps are they trump all. That's true for more positions than just the quarterback position. And so if we have Driscoll come in and fall on his face and he doesn't look quite like he did on Sunday, and he's not able to sustain drives and he's not able to get the ball out to the receivers and all those things, like getting Bortles in there is going to help, because those are reps that our young developing receivers are going to have, right? Noah Fant needs every possible opportunity. Judy and Hamler both need every opportunity. Cleveland, if he makes his way on the field, and Tim Patrick even is young. Like, we basically all of our skill players, maybe outside of Melvin Gordon, are really, really young and need as many reps as they can have. Having a veteran quarterback who has the most experience now out of anybody on that offense, that's key. That's big time. So if you get in a position like 3rd down and 2 on the road and you have a chance to win, like, you've got a guy that maybe has been there before. Now, maybe he hasn't won a lot, but dude, we were gassing up Joe Flacco for being a Super Bowl MVP just a year ago.
He's in his prime.
I mean, Miles, oh my God. Miles Jack wasn't down. Okay. Miles Jack wasn't down. Like that. I will say that as much as I say a few other political statements that I won't repeat here, but like, that's key. Like, Bortles should have been playing in a Super Bowl. As crazy as that sounds, Blake Bortles should have been a guy that led his team to a Super Bowl. That experience matters, right? And being able to have that experience to leverage and feed into our younger guys. I mean, Drew Lock has talent, but Drew Lock hasn't done anything at this level yet. And so I think that Drew Lock has the respect of his teammates? Absolutely. I'm not saying he doesn't. But I'm saying for dang sure, like, Driscoll is tough, but Driscoll doesn't have a ton of experience either, but he doesn't have the pedigree and the reps and the chemistry with those players, through the entirety of the offseason. At least Bortles has something that he can leverage. So if we're trying to put a Band-Aid on this thing, I think Bortles makes a lot of sense. Bortles isn't a franchise guy at this point, but who knows? What if this is kind of a best case scenario for us long term? What if it's 5 weeks and Drew Lock, takes the full 5 weeks to come back, and maybe it's not Driscoll this week and we get 4 weeks of Blake Bortles and he plays really good, right? He plays some really solid football that makes other teams say, you know what, I might want that guy. Well, what happens if we have him on the roster and at the end of the year somebody goes and pays him $15 million? Crazier things have happened. We get compensatory picks at that point, right? Like, I mean, we're playing chess, not checkers here. So, like, there's no downside to bringing in Bortles. There's immense upside. So the people that are like, oh my gosh, Bortles, we could have brought him in a year ago. We didn't.
Yeah.
I really like a lot of the upside, and I want the gunslinger that's going to be able to enhance a lot of what our receivers, our young receivers, our talented receivers are going to be able to do, even without Cortland Sutton in there. So I'm all on board for Bortles. That's number one. He's not a threat to Locke. That's number two. And there's a lot of upside. That's number three.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you have to think too, like, why did Bortles agree to come to Denver for the minimum salary? After this was a guy who, according to everything that we've read, which has not been much over the course of the offseason, like, he didn't want to sign with a team unless he liked the opportunity. So what did the Broncos tell him to get him to come in for COVID tests, hey, get in here today, get in here yesterday for the COVID testing. What did they say to him to get him off of his couch for the veteran minimum salary? You know, I don't know. I don't know what they said, because we've got 2 games in a matter of 4 days coming up. And at that point, you know, if you're, I don't know what the scenario is, but I mean, I think this says as much about, you know, Brett Rippon's readiness to play as it does anything else. You know, Brett Rippon is probably not, okay, it's early in the season, you're 0-2. If Jeff Driscoll goes down, you cannot throw Brett Rippon out onto an NFL regular season field right now. That's not happening. So the Broncos realize that. And then I think too, like, Driscoll's leash is going to be pretty short. You know, if he goes out there and he throws 2 interceptions in the first half, I wouldn't be surprised if Blake Bortles comes out at halftime, like you said, Maddie, crush a beer in the locker room, get a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and ask the receivers what he's supposed to do on a given play. And then I mean, would it shock anybody at this point? I mean, I don't know. So I have no idea what none of the pieces add up to me, right? I mean, Drew Lock's injury timeline. Okay, is it really closer to 3 weeks than 5, or why would you bring Bortles in if it's closer to 3 than 5? And why is Bortles leaving his couch for the veteran minimum when he said that he wasn't going to go unless it was the right situation? And, you know, what's the deal with Driscoll? Like, he looked like he played decently well, other than, you know, taking a couple of self sacks, and like all these different pieces that you have with the puzzle that we've been given. They don't really add up to a thing that's like, oh yeah, that makes sense that they want Blake Bortles to be the 3rd QB when Drew Lock. That doesn't make any sense to me. Like, oh, they want Bortles to be the number 2 QB, but they could have signed him earlier in the offseason. That doesn't make sense to me either. They would have signed him back in March, you know? So none of it adds up as like oh yeah, that's clearly the strategy they're thinking with Blake Bortles, aside from if I come from left field and say they're trying to play him as soon as possible. That's the only thing that really makes sense to me, because it seems so quick. It seems like they got him on the line like immediately after the injury, and he immediately agreed, which to me indicates that he was promised something other than money. So I don't know. You guys tell me what you think about that.
I don't know. There's just so much to unpack with the Bortles signing, because, you know, and two, it's just even with the Lock injury that you mentioned, Sarah, like, why wasn't he on IR? Like you bring in Bortles.
Well, he'll go on IR.
Right.
Once the Bortles signing is official, Lock will go on IR. And at that point, the 3-week countdown becomes, is it going to be 3 weeks, or is it going to be the full 5? And because it's his throwing arm, we can safely assume that it's going to be the full 5. Like, I have no question about that at this point. They're not going to rush Drew Lock back and ruin his professional football career. So that's where I come in on that part of it.
But yeah, and then of course, you know, then you have the Brett Rippon thing, which I think is probably the most logical reason as far as all of this is just, is the Brett Rippon, and then of course with Jeff Driscoll. I guess the thing that's just been been the big question with me is, at least, you know, and we're not in the Dove Valley headquarters every day, right? We're not there. What was one of the things that was told? What was one of the things that was told from us? You know, with everything going on, and with everything with the quarterback position, what was everything told? I mean, it was that you had the Denver Broncos going out and not getting a quarterback. Remember, Mike Kliss tweeted that out. From what I remember, he tweeted out, or he mentioned something to the extent of that you had the Broncos, and that they were probably more than likely going to roll with Brett Rippon and Jeff Driscoll as the QBs 1 and QBs 2. And then sure enough, within like 48 hours, you know, I mean, they end up signing Blake Bortles. I think that's probably the one thing that's probably just still kind of in the back of my mind. So Sayer, one of the things that I was catching that I had mentioned was just that, you know, what was one of the things that we had heard, you know, just the last 48 hours was, now granted it, you know, and we're not there in Dove Valley, but what was the one thing we heard? You know, that Brett Rippon and Jeff Driscoll were the expected QB1 and QB2. and then 48 hours later, they signed Blake Bortles. I think that that's just one of those things that was just like, what?
Can't believe everything you read on the internet, Cameron. I'm just kidding. It's but dude, you have to anticipate. There's no way Brett Rippon was seeing the field this year before week 15 or 16, right? I mean, if it was, man, we're desperate right now, and this is the only guy that knows the offense, and we're not going to sign a quarterback for $1 million with 3 games left to play. That's when you play a guy like Brett Rippon. And from what I understand, or from what I've read, it sounds like Rippon is really more of the Bash brother with Drew Lock, as Kubiak was to John Elway back in the day, to where they just vibe off each other. They bounce out, they're friends. They came into the league together. Not that Rippon can't play, because a lot of us liked him coming out of Boise State as well. But I think that you're talking about regular season games and jobs at stake, and you're talking about developing a young team like Maddie was just talking about too. You cannot have a guy like Rippon out there when you're trying to develop a first and second round wide receiver with 14 games to play. So if you think about it logically, does it make any sense to have Brett Rippon as a guy who you're one snap away? You're one snap away from Brett Rippon starting 13 games
with no playing career.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
So y'all don't want to see the Rolls Royce formation with Royce Freeman?
I want to see it
running the show.
Well, and maybe that's one of I don't know. Maybe there might be a Wildcat formation that we see with Royce Freeman. You never know.
I'm coining Rolls Royce right now. I'm coining that.
Actually, I think didn't Royce Freeman wasn't he nicknamed Rolls Royce in college? Wasn't he nicknamed Rolls Royce in college?
Maybe, but that's what the formation's called.
Oh, okay. That's okay. You were saying that's what the form. Okay, I hear you. So then, as far as then that kind of leads us into the big debate, the tank for Trevor Lawrence.
Maddie's been ready to whiz all over this.
He's been ready to open up that can right now.
All right. Are the Broncos going to intentionally tank? Absolutely not. This Blake Bortles signing shows that, right? Shows that they want to develop their guys and they want to have the best chance to win, even when Drew Lock's out. Okay, that's step one. So this whole tank for Trevor thing, not going to happen. Now, if that happens to be a byproduct of the fact that we have a lot of injuries and we don't get to see Drew Lock come on the field, or Drew Lock plays hurt and isn't effective, then at the end of the season, that will raise the conversation. And I think that all of us would be, very short-sighted to say that that's not at least in the Broncos calculus, right? If Drew Lock goes basically, 2 seasons playing 5 games, right? He went 4-1 at the end of last year. At that point, I mean, we've been down this road before. We're good with Paxton Lynch and then Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes get drafted, right? So, I know that we've used a little higher draft capital on Paxton Lynch than we did with Drew Lock. But if we have a chance for Trevor Lawrence and our team is that bad and we haven't seen what we needed to see out of Drew Lock, then that raises the question. However, it's still not a slam dunk. If we have the first pick, worst case scenario, we may take him. We may take Penei Sewell, the left tackle out of Oregon, who by all accounts is the best freaking tackle prospect we've seen since Joe Thomas, right? I mean, pretty much a surefire Hall of Famer type of guy at left tackle, which is exactly what you would need for a Drew Lock. And maybe, 2 freak injuries, the hand injury, and then this thing, the labrum issue, or joint, AC joint strain, there is a debate to be had for sure. Are the Broncos going to be tanking at any given point in the season at all? Absolutely not. And if Drew Lock comes in and shows the promise that we've been expecting and makes progress, then, I mean, it's a moot point. We probably win 4 games and we're out of the Lawrence sweepstakes anyway. So that's just kind of where I see things. Could Trevor Lawrence very well be a Denver Bronco at the end of the draft next season? Yes, I'm not saying, 2020 is crazy, y'all. Anything can happen. Blake Bortles is the quarterback of the Broncos. But 2020 is crazy. Like, Blake Bortles leading us to a 500 record after 4 games would be like peak 2020, right? Like, what could you expect different? So, like, it could go either way. I'd just say pump the brakes and let the guys play, and then we'll see where the cards fall at the end of the season.
Yeah, and I don't even think, to be honest, and you guys know, if there's a Drew Lock fan club meeting, like I would have like one of those, what are those hats that guys wear to, they have the hats with a little tassel on the top of it. I would be wearing one of those as like a card carrying club member of the Drew Lock fan club.
Kind of like the Minnie Mouse.
You'd be on the board, right? Of the Drew Lock fan club?
The board of directors. And so I am firmly on board the Drew Lock train, and I believe in his future with the team. With that being said, if the Broncos are bad enough or hurt enough to get into the top 5 of next year's draft, I don't even think it's limited to Trevor Lawrence. I think you have Trey Lance of North Dakota State and Justin Fields of Ohio State that are firmly in that discussion, as well as game-altering type of quarterbacks. Justin Fields was ridiculous last year at Ohio State in his basically first year playing, as a starter in college football. 41 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. I mean, insane production. And Trey Lance, his production was even crazier. 28 total TD or 28 pass TDs and like, I don't remember how many rushing TDs or something like that. It was 28 total TDs, I think, with 0 interceptions. And at any level of college football, if you're a starting QB, those numbers are insane, and it makes no logical sense. And for those guys to put up those kind of numbers and still be behind a guy like Trevor Lawrence, any given year, those guys would be considered as potential number 1 overall picks. And you're talking about a QB draft that has 3 guys at the top. That's, it may be less of a crapshoot as like Mitch Trubisky plus Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes. And maybe these guys may be more sure things than them, but it's a situation where you've got 3 guys clearly at the top that you're sitting there as a lead decision maker for a football team, and their franchise QBs sitting on the board. You just simply don't pass. You don't. Unless you know for a fact that Drew Lock is, oh my gosh, like he blew us away when he came back from the shoulder injury. In that case, you're winning games. You're not going to be sitting there. If you don't win the games and Drew Lock doesn't blow you away, you're 2 years into that investment and you're sitting there looking at Lawrence or Fields or Trey Lance. You don't pass. I mean, the situation, even with Sewell from Oregon, if you're talking about him versus Trevor Lawrence, that's like you're talking about Andrew Luck versus whoever was the top tackle in the 2012 draft. I don't even know.
Or almost Quentin Nelson too. I mean, like,
well, so, yeah. Pick the best. You're talking about Andrew Luck versus Joe Thomas. Who do you pick in that instance? You pick Andrew Luck 100 times out of 100. Joe Thomas, where did he take the Cleveland Browns? You know what I'm saying? I mean, it wasn't his fault entirely, but Andrew Luck immediately took the Indianapolis Colts back to the playoffs. He's a franchise QB, difference maker, generational talent. Those words are not hyperbole when you're talking about Trevor Lawrence. I'll just tell you that right now. This guy is ridiculous. And for him to live up to the hype that he's faced coming into Clemson, which is not easy for prep QBs, as I'm sure, Maddie, I mean, you've seen guys come in and out of Oklahoma a lot, and a number of guys I'm sure transferring away, big hype players in Cameron with Nebraska. And Trevor Lawrence came into Clemson as the next Andrew Luck out of high school, and he has more than lived up to the billing of like, wow, like this guy's even better than we thought. Like he can run, he can run away from people, he can break tackles, like he can do all these. He's crazy. And for anybody to think like if you're sitting there and he's on the board that you wouldn't take him, no way you don't take that guy for sure, even with Drew Lock.
Yeah, a couple of nuggets. So you said Trey Lance. I just want for the listeners to understand how crazy this is. 28 touchdowns, no interceptions. So right on the money there. 1,100 yards rushing and 14 touchdowns on the ground. Like that's pretty dominant. That's dual threat. That's a guy. And he's got the makeup too. Like he's Carson Wentz, I mean, you say whatever you want. Like he ended up proving like that he's a franchise quarterback as far as talent goes. This guy is a better prospect than Carson Wentz was. And so like he's not overly hyped up for no reason. Like he's legit going to be a top 10 player in this draft, probably top 5. So that's Trey Lance. You mentioned the 2012 NFL draft. Also for the listeners, so Andrew Luck was the number 1 pick. If y'all remember, Robert Griffin the third. Next, Trent Richardson went 3rd. The number 1 tackle was Matt Khalil out of USC. So we know how his career went. But fun fact, you know who was picked 3 picks after him? The Matt Khalil? He's a Bronco. Mark Barron.
Wow.
So man, how time flies. So that was just kind of fun nugget there.
Yeah, I think for me with even the whole tanking logic, my problem with the whole tanking logic is I just don't like the intention of losing on purpose. Because if you're losing on purpose, well then you're going to be down this whole rabbit hole and this losing culture and to where just this losing mindset that we lost another one, oh wow, oh this is unfortunate, we lost another one, just that kind of thing, just kind of going it week by week, knowing the fact that you're going to lose and everything else. And so that's just my thing. And then of course, then you factor in just tanking for a quarterback. At the end of the day, between Trevor Lawrence and Drew Lock, at the end of the day, it's going to just truly depend on where the Broncos stand on Lock at the end of the day. And as of right now, we can firmly say that Drew Lock is the guy because, one, they built the offense around him. They gave him all these toys. They gave him his best friend in the draft. I mean, Albert O is probably like that true confirmation that he is the guy. So, I mean, like on the surface and just truly everything that we see on paper, they built this entire offense and everything else under Pat Shurmur. They even brought in Pat Shurmur because they believed in Drew Lock. Pat Shurmur arguably came here because he loved Drew Lock. And I would kind of suck if you're Pat Shurmur, not to say that you probably would be jumping up and down that you drafted Trevor Lawrence in that case. But, I mean, it would kind of suck for Pat Shurmur to kind of be in year 2 of potentially a situation where you came here because of Drew Lock and now the Broncos are out here drafting Trevor Lawrence. Obviously, it's kind of a freaky situation like that, but I just think on the surface, there's still a lot to unpack. There's a lot to unfold and everything with the whole Trevor Lawrence thing, but on the surface, it still hinges on where the Broncos are at with Drew Lock. As of right now, he's the guy. He's got a winning record at 4-2 in about 6.5 games. I mean, the guy, he clearly has shown that he is the guy the players will gravitate towards. I mean, they love the guy. You cannot say anything negative about him. And I think that to what Sarah was mentioning though, if you do have the number 1 overall pick, or let alone, and we should probably clarify, like even if you have like the 1st and 3rd overall pick, maybe even 5th overall pick, I mean, there will be quarterbacks, and we just mentioned 3. There is a decent possibility that 3 quarterbacks, if you're in the top 5, there's a possibility that 3 of those quarterbacks will be taken in the top 5. And so it's going to end up being, where do the Broncos truly stand with that? Now, it is worth noting that the only time the Broncos were ever close to the number 1 overall pick was when they drafted Von Miller in 2011. That was really the only time the Broncos were really that close to going after and maybe even picking Cam Newton instead of Von Miller. I mean, we were really that close potentially of taking Cam Newton instead of Von Miller.
Yeah, and I think that, fans who actively want the team to lose, I mean, I'm not afraid to say it, you're just not a good fan of a team, like just straight up. Like if you want your team to lose at this point in the season, especially, like even last year in week 17 against the Raiders, I mean, I could see wanting the draft position, but to diminish the importance of that win for the team and for Drew Lock and the way that you build the team at the end of that season, to me, that's just, I mean, you got to check your heart on that one. I mean, that doesn't make sense that you would be a fan of the Denver Broncos and say at this point in the year, all right, shut it down, tank for Trevor Lawrence.
Week two. Yeah,
we're 2 weeks in, and last year we started 0-4 and ended up winning 7 of the last 12 games. So I mean, they could go on a streak right here and win 7 of their next 12 and be in decent position, to get that 7th spot. I mean, who knows what could happen? They could do better than 7 of their next 12. The schedule is not that bad, with some of the teams that they have on it and some of the games they're playing at home. So how many of us thought, hey, maybe this is the year that the Broncos could take one from Kansas City? Is Drew Lock going to be back for both of those games? I mean, I don't know. I don't think now's the time to start talking about tanking, but Trevor Lawrence is an intrigue. I mean, think about Trevor Lawrence throwing the ball to Jerry Jeudy and Noah Fant and KJ Hamler and, all of these different guys. I mean, for
Cortland Sutton still.
Cortland Sutton. I mean, Trevor Lawrence throwing those guys the ball. I mean, that.
You got me drooling.
You think about that for a minute and it's like, dang, like that sounds pretty dang good. So I don't know. I just don't like the idea of fans actively rooting for a team to lose for a specific draft pick. That means that you think you think that these guys are out there kind of selling themselves out and not really trying and
exactly
making your franchise look bad. And at the same time, these same people are like, oh, well, Pat Bowlen would never stand for this losing. And it's like, you're asking the team to tank and you're saying, well, Pat Bowlen would never stand for this losing. Would Pat Bowlen ever tank? I mean, give me a break.
Yeah.
No, I will out myself though and say a couple of years ago when we won 2 games in a row against the Colts and the Jets with Brock Osweiler, like, yeah, it was cool to win a game, but I was like internally saying like, oh, we're screwing ourselves in the draft, but
screwing the Baker Mayfield option.
Oh my gosh. And look, haters, go ahead and hate, but I still think Baker is that guy. I'm going to stand by him. He was just way too productive at Oklahoma. He's got way too much talent. That offense, for some reason, with all that talent, just doesn't click. And I'm not saying it's all Baker. Some of it is, but me being a Sooners fan, I'm going to defend my boy. Although Kyler Murray's looking pretty stinking good. So anyway, back to our regularly scheduled programming. I did want, I mean, and by all intents and purposes, we were really high on Baker Mayfield too. So he would have been a real option for us if we would have been able to grab him. I mean, it's pretty crazy to say at this point, but I guess things worked out okay. I think we got Chubb out of the deal for winning those 2 games. So Denzel Ward went the pick right before, and I don't really know that was the better pick or not. It's too early to tell. I'm definitely glad that we didn't jump up and get Sam Darnold though. At this point, I don't want my quarterback seeing ghosts on the field. That's just me. So I mean, and I say all that is a long-winded way to say maybe that the draft's kind of a crapshoot. And so if we lost those 2 games, who knows, maybe we would have had Sam Darnold and we would have been in a much different position today than we are, going forward. So the draft is the NFL season and all the variables that happen. And then when you get in the draft, like the course of history changes so much. We just mentioned Cam Newton would have been an option for us. How different does the Denver Broncos history look if we draft Cam Newton instead of Von Miller, right? Von Miller, Super Bowl MVP, Von Miller, a key part of that defense that, helped put things in place to get to a Super Bowl and then led one of the best defensive teams in history to a Super Bowl win. So, and oh, by the way, the sheriff never comes to Denver with Cam Newton there. So a lot of things go. You just kind of got to have to let things play out and trust that John Elway and company, who have been crushing each of the last 3 drafts, is going to be able to step up to the plate and get it done in its 4th consecutive draft.
And of course, as we're mentioning a lot of variables, there are variables that with the quarterback position, if it ends up being that the Broncos do move on from Locke, well, then there's the other variable that you don't go to the draft and go get Trevor Lawrence, that you can go out and make a move for a quarterback. Like, for instance, I'm still really high on Sam Darnold. And so I'm at the point where I want to free Sam Darnold from New York. I want to get him away from Adam Gase and this particular unfortunate sea of ghosts that he's in with New York. So if Locke's not the guy, then heck, I would at least put out a feeler about Sam Darnold, ask about the availability, and he would be a guy that I would inquire about. Matt Stafford has been a guy that had been one of the quarterbacks that I would have loved to have seen in a Broncos uniform for the longest time. And in fact, interestingly enough, Drew Lock kind of pairs comparatively to Matt Stafford in some ways. So I think that, for the Broncos, it wouldn't necessarily just be the whole Trevor Lawrence discussion also, but it would also be, who are the quarterbacks that are on other teams? Who are the quarterbacks that, you could even get, that you could even bring in? I was just kind of roaming through Twitter and everything, and I saw PJ Walker's name. You're looking at PJ Walker, a guy that was Broncos really were high on coming out of the XFL. And, just that's kind of like a very, very under the radar name. But just, those types of guys that kind of just don't roll off the tongue all that much, but sure enough, they're on another team's roster.
Yeah, I think the best thing that we can hope for right now is that Driscoll and Bortles keep the ship afloat for the next 5 weeks. And by some way, shape, or form, with Phillip Lindsay and AJ Bouye getting healthy here in the next couple of weeks, that the Broncos managed to win, at least 3 of these next 5 games. And when Drew Lock comes back, they're at least 3-4. And at that point, you've got something to really build off of. You've got something that you can, okay, we can work with 3-4. We can work with 4-3 even, which would be awesome. You can't lose to the Jets on Thursday night next week, and you probably can't lose to Tom Brady this weekend. And I'll tell you, the number one reason you can't lose to Tom Brady this weekend is that for all time, he will have a 500 record against the Broncos and not a losing record. So that can't stand. He needs to continually have a losing record against the Broncos for all eternity. But it's one of those things where when Drew Lock comes back, the Broncos have to have done enough that he can come back and he can actually go in and help them compete to make one of those wild card playoff spots. And that's the bottom line. If you don't give him that opportunity, all that we're looking at is the same thing that we saw at the end of last year, which was, hey, the team's kind of, fish in a barrel right now. Can you come in and let's see what this guy can do. There's basically, he's playing with house money in that situation, and now he's not. And I think that changes your offseason evaluation at the QB position when a guy's playing with house money and when he's not playing with house money, and the way that he responds and plays. And now you're looking at 2 consecutive years potentially with Drew Lock going on injured reserve. And that's a substantial concern. I'm not knocking his durability at all, but he's gone on IR now with 2 eerily similar injury plays where he's falling to the ground. Somebody hits him as he's going down. And last year he hurt his thumb, and this year he hurt his shoulder, doing the exact same thing, trying to keep himself off the ground with one arm. So I'm not saying that's bound to happen again, but it's something that you have to think about when you're talking about, do we draft one of these top 5 prospects at the QB position or not?
And also too, there's also this whole consistency thing because of that ESPN annoying carousel, the QB carousel. The Broncos have not had any consistency at that position, at all. So, and I'm not necessarily knocking the idea of that if you do have the number one pick, at that particular point, all options are on the table. Sewell's on the table, Lawrence is on the table, Fields is on the table. You just can't dismiss stuff like that. But there's the whole consistency thing. You're going into this potential scenario where you're looking at, we're looking into a new quarterback now. Like there's this possibility we're looking into a new quarterback and potentially maybe a new offense just to where you may have to just do some tweaking. And I just think that you're looking at this to where you're maybe going back to that same old rabbit hole that you had after Peyton Manning. And now that you potentially have that glimmer of hope or, Sayre, that awakening, as we were saying when Drew Lock took over in December. But I mean, there's just been at that particular point, if they moved on from Lock, not saying it's a right decision or a wrong decision, but it would be going back the exact same rabbit hole that they had past Manning of that revolving door of a new QB.
Yeah, I do want some consistency at the position. That would be kind of a once in a lifetime, once in a generation type of opportunity to get a guy who many people have compared to Andrew Luck. Many people have even compared with all the comparisons coming out to Peyton Manning, who we love so much. So although his style of play is slightly different, he's a little more mobile than Peyton kind of ever was. But that's real. So either way, it's a win scenario for us moving forward. We either keep Lock and build up and trade out of that spot or whatever. But I'm saying this as somebody that wants to buy a jersey of someone and know that I can ride or die with that player like the Chiefs can with Mahomes for the next 12 years, right? They're at worst case scenario, most likely, they're going to have 15 years with number 15. Doesn't suck for them. For the guy that reminds me a lot of John Elway and how he plays and how he's able to extend plays and all of those things. We want that, right? If Drew Lock can be that guy, we want him to be that guy. I'm glad that it was a short injury and he's going to get a chance to come back and we're going to be able to see him prove that he is the starter. But in all intents and purposes, he will be the starter moving forward once he comes back. And I'm hoping that he does well enough so that we don't have to have this conversation again.
All right, so let's go ahead and just take a glance back now. And we talked a bit about the Pittsburgh Steelers game. Let's move forward. Let's move forward to the game that before the season started, this was my dream Super Bowl matchup. I wanted a Drew Lock against Tom Brady Super Bowl. We're obviously not going to get a Drew Lock versus Tom Brady matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But what is one or two things that you guys personally are looking forward to when the Broncos play not the New England Patriots led by Tom Brady, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers led by Tom Brady?
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to more of the offensive playmakers. That's for sure. I want to see those guys continually grow, continue to just obliterate NFL defensive backs with their route running skills, and that's what I'm excited about. It's hard to get really pumped about anything that we've seen defensively other than, Justin Simmons and Kareem Jackson at this point. Nothing is really standing out as wow, I can't wait to see this guy play again. But for the offensive side, man, that those rookie receivers plus Noah Fant, that's something that we can hang our hats on, and that's something that weekly we can say, wow, those guys are going to put forth jaw-dropping reps every single week. And so that's what I'm most looking forward to. And I'm looking forward to winning because the Broncos are going to win this game. I wouldn't want to be catching the Buccaneers if they were 0-2. And I'm not saying that we're as good right now as the Buccaneers given the state of our roster health-wise, but I do think that the Broncos are good enough to win this game, even without Drew Lock at the QB. And the reason for that is like we've been talking about throughout the show, the defense has played well enough to win against two AFC playoff teams. The Bucs are really still catching their footing, and Brady struggles against the Broncos. There's no doubt about it. So, and with that, going up against a Vic Fangio defense and playing against our offense, which those guys can make plays after the catch, even if we have to use the short passing game. I'm most excited to see a victory and to see those young receivers.
Yeah, I think if there's really anything, and I kind of tweeted it too on my page, if there's really one thing that for Bronco fans that you should just want to be patient with, because we're talking about patience, right? Well, if we're one of the areas that we should always look forward to week in or week out, it should always be our young playmakers, and it should always be those wide receivers of the KJ Hamlers, the Jerry Judys. So I think that those are at least the wide receiving group like that, and with Noah Fant, it's a really good pick. I think for me, we saw the size of Chase Claypool, what he did a little bit on the play against Michael Ojemudia. This will be a very interesting test with him this week because you have a lot of weapons that are going to be coming back. Well, one wide receiver in particular on the at least for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and Chris Godwin. So I think it'll be very interesting to see what the Broncos defensive backs do against the bigger and size advantage of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. At least initially, the one that I could probably think of is I'll probably put a Sang Bassi on. Was it Scotty Miller, the wide receiver that the Bucs have? That's probably going to be in the new Edelman for Brady. But as far as those big receivers, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, are they going to be putting a Bryce Callahan on him, on one of those receivers, along with Ojemudia on the other one, whether that's Evans or Godwin?
So I'm going to cheat because this is my podcast and I do what I want. But there are two things that I'm really looking for. One, they have a certain running back that torched us for 225 yards last year in Leonard Fournette. Granted, a lot of that came on that 80-yard run or whatever that should have been called a holding by the left guard, I'm pretty sure. I got to see that in person, so that wasn't fun. How can we bottle him up, right? Him and Ronald Jones, they're starting to get clicking a little bit. They're getting some stuff going on the ground, which with those receivers and with Tom Brady, that's pretty scary for what that offense could be if they could have some semblance of a balance there. I really want, as crazy as this sounds, I want Tom Brady to have to beat us. I want him to prove that he can throw out routes with zip, and he's not going to hang that ball up there and put us in a position to get pick sixes and stuff. We cannot let Fournette and Jones go off, so I'm worried about that. And then also, Garrett Bowles is starting to hold his own, but really our ends and can we address things and not have 19 quarterback hits this week going against a guy who maybe has a chip on his shoulder and wants to prove to us that we shouldn't have let him go and should have made him a priority in Shaq Barrett. And so I'm really thinking that we could see the Pro Bowler from a year ago be in our backfield a ton on Sunday. And what does that look like? Are we able to get help? Is Gordon able to chip a little bit? Is Fant going to be able to, hold down the fort a little bit before he goes out and pass routes and things like that? Like, what does that look like? How is Shermer going to scheme us and being able to get a little bit of time and slow down their pass rush? So I'm kind of excited to see both of those matchups. And I think if we win both of those matchups, if we can, definitely win the running game and then hold the pass rush at bay for the most part at bay. See what I did there? I think that we'll be in great shape to maybe get our first win of the season. So very, very interested in both of those micro parts of the game, the games within the game, if you will.
And of course there's the big factor. That is the one that has been talked about so much with the Broncos and covering tight ends. That's one position that is not mentioned, of course, with especially the Buccaneers, that because it's all Godwin and Evans and now with the running game. Well, now you have arguably the deepest tight end group with Rob Gronkowski, Cameron Braid, and O.J. Howard. I think that this is going to be a really tough test for the Broncos and truly where they try and slow down that tight end passing attack as well.
Do we have any predictions for what the game looks like? Right now, just so you know, Vegas predicts it to be 24-18 in favor of the Bucs.
Okay, I mean, I could see a Bucs win, but I just have one question: why? I guess my question's always been with these weird predictions from people. Like Susie Colbert predicted the Broncos to only score 12 points, and they said 18, right?
18.75. 18.75.
18.75. Like, where did they come up with these numbers?
I don't know, but Vegas is really good. They're right more than they're 18? Not.
But like 18 though.
Yeah, I mean I don't know. That's crazy, but
it'll be close. It'll be close. I think it'll be really close. I think we'll look at it basically, maybe not the same identical game that we saw for Pittsburgh, but I mean it'll be a really close game. I think it has a chance to be, 20, 27. I'll say 24-17. I'll say 24-17, but I will say this, though. If Driscoll can manage to score 21-plus points again against the Buccaneers, I think there's a decent chance they do win the game again. Or when Driscoll's first game as a Bronco.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping for a similar start to this game as we saw against Minnesota last year, to where, I mean, nobody really thinks, oh yeah, Brandon Allen going on the road to play the Vikings. They're tough defense. They've got a good quarterback already. They've got a established, veterans on offense. And then we go in there and we start just blowing them out. I think I'm really hoping for that kind of a game without the second half defensive collapse. I don't know that we're necessarily going to blow out the Buccaneers, but I mean, it's a game that the Broncos absolutely have to win, and I just don't see them losing it at home with the fans, the momentum. There's a lot of guys on that team that are going to be very they're going to take pride in winning this particular game, just because it's, you don't want to start 0-3. You can't start 0-3, and there's just something to be said for those certain trends, like getting off the schneid, so to speak, or, I always hate it when the Broncos have a long winning streak against a team, because then inevitably it feels like, well, this is probably going to be the time that streak ends, right? I mean, it's been too long. And I mean, it's only 2 games to start the season that they've lost, but they've been so close in those 2 games. Now you're going back home. Everybody's ticked off, laser focused. And I think they're going to draw up a good enough game plan for Jeff Driscoll to win the game. I don't know if it's going to be high scoring or not, but I think that they're going to come out and kind of surprise the people who are underestimating like what Pat Shurmur's able to concoct, the impact that Melvin Gordon can have as the lead runner. And then I think the Buccaneers are going to be going in a little overzealous, thinking, I mean, we're going to blow these guys out. It's Jeff Driscoll. These Broncos are battered. They've got no Von Miller. And I think the Broncos are going to be a better sum of their parts in this game. I think the Bucs might overlook us a little bit.
So you sold me. Here's my prediction. Tampa Bay 24, Denver 27. And it's going to be with Jerry Jeudy catching 10 balls for 170 yards and 2 touchdowns. I'm calling it right now. I'm calling my shot. The thing is, Driscoll is a gunslinger. Was he looking passive? Was he looking like he wasn't ready to take shots? Do you know how you beat the Buccaneers defense? You throw the ball on that secondary. You find a way to not get killed with their pass rush, and you get the ball out. He's going to have all the reps with Jeudy. He's going to have all the reps with Hamler. He's going to have all the reps with Fant. He is the guy going into this week. And dude's like, he's not going to be able to play passive because he knows Bortles is coming in next week. So he's like, look, I'm just going to ball out. Bortles, you go drink a beer on the sidelines. I got this. And so I think at least the coaching staff's going to have a tough decision to make. I'm calling my shot right now. Broncos 27, Buccaneers 24. Right now, the Broncos money line is plus 213 if you want to take them. I don't know if you're betting, if you have the ability to give a little juice, maybe give a point and get your odds a little better than that even. But I would take the Broncos at home. I really don't see this team falling to 0-3, especially with how close we are. I really like it even with all of our sustained injuries. So that's kind of where I stand. Okay.
I could easily be swayed just as simply as that. I mean, if Driscoll ends up winning this game, I'm pretty sure that both he and Bortles are having a shotgun together. I'm sure, at least both in the locker room.
Basically, you're just saying that Bortles is going to be just absolutely hammered by the end of this game. Hey, all the beers he's drinking on the sideline,
or he's going to be the ultimate teammate, whichever way you look at it.
Well, I mean, they can both slam some Strawberry Sky on the sideline together, so that'll work out really well for us, I think. So if you're a bet man, I like that. All right, there's one more little quick segment I would like to bring up. So there's a team in Tampa, right? They play in the state of Florida, but there are two other teams that play this week, and they play on Thursday night. And the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Miami Dolphins. And their starting quarterbacks have some glorious facial hair. And as of late, the latest thing today is the thing on social media between Fitzmagic and Minshew Mania going at it, basically saying whose looks best. This is the Manely Broncos podcast after all. So how could I not talk about the glorious manes that Gardner Minshew and Ryan Fitzpatrick have? So, gentlemen, which is more glorious, the beard for Ryan Fitzpatrick or the mustache for Gardner Minshew?
Depends on who you. Depends on what. I guess what's your favorite style? I guess. I mean, are you into the Robert E. Lee beard of the Civil War? Are you like Ryan Fitzpatrick? Are you more like into like the Beach Boys? Like the long hair
Duke
with
Kaboom.
the yeah.
If you have kids and you know who Duke Kaboom is.
Are you into the worship leader of 5 years ago with the beard, or are you into the worship leader of today with the mustache? Like which way are you trending towards? And that is a shot at Sayre, who doesn't have anything on his face.
Yeah, I'm on record.
Cleanly shaven.
Yeah, exactly. I'm on record on my Twitter account as saying that there's pretty much nobody that looks good with a mustache, just a straight mustache. I mean, you've got to be like Steve Harvey from Family Feud, or just a very select few to look good with a mustache. Tom Selleck, just like you look weird without it. I mean, even Gardner, I gotta say, man, he wears it pretty well, but I'm going with the beard 100 times out of 100, just because that beard, man, that takes some serious upkeep. And Fitzpatrick, he looks about as funny without it as anybody would. So I think it's become such a part of him that I've got to go with the beard.
Yeah, I think at some point they did it with Charlie Blackmon. The Rockies did it with Charlie Blackmon. He was coming into the league, and then you see the transformation of what he is now to when he was just clean shaven. And I think I got to go with Ryan Fitzpatrick just because you get that just the thickness of the beard. But not only that, but the imagery that I always have in my brain with Ryan Fitzpatrick is the one that makes him look like Conor McGregor, where he had the shirt tail, or the shirt was open and you could see the chest hair with the chain, and like it was like the ultimate drip that you could ask for with a legit beard and everything. And that's about the best picture that I could ever remember with Ryan Fitzpatrick.
All right. So look, You say it's got to require a lot of upkeep. Have you seen Fitzpatrick's beard? Like that dude could have like a family of birds living in it. All right, like the upkeep for real,
like the Family Guy episode.
Yeah, for real, exactly. So like, does he really? Is there a lot of upkeep? Look, he's half Ivy League scholar and half mountain man, which I know a lot of people in Colorado appreciate, and that's fine. He doesn't pull it off like Charlie Blackmon does, and that's fine. Like he's Ryan Fitzmagic, he can do whatever he wants. But the Minshew mustache is so iconic at this point. Like, not a lot of people can pull off having a unibrow, but somehow Anthony Davis has made it his brand, right? So it works. And I know exactly 0 females that think that that's attractive. And I repeatedly like show that to people. I'm like, oh, so money's impressive, huh? But how about this? Like, it's not impressive. And I think they lost tonight, so go Nuggets. Yeah, I got to go with the Minshew mustache, man. It's iconic. It's his brand. It helps him kind of, I think he gets like, oh my gosh, like Samson with his long hair. Like, I think he draws power out of his mustache, man. Like, it's something about Minshew mania and that mustache that it's such a nicely symbiotic relationship that I'm taking Minshew mania. I am riding that mustache train right now. So that's kind of where I stand, but I'm outnumbered and that's fine.
Well, I won't be growing. I'll tell you right now, I won't be growing any Ryan Fitzpatrick's, beard or growing any, long hair like Gardner Minshew with the classic mustache and everything else. So I can tell you right now, that's not happening.
I wish I could.
Mutton chops.
Yeah. Unless they had like those bearded wigs, then I guess you could probably consider it.
Having the job that I have, I unfortunately am not allowed to grow out facial hair. But outside of a mustache that looks terrible and tacky that my wife hates, but every November and every March, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll be able to see it in all of its glory. So there it is.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening to another installment of the Manely Broncos podcast. That was our Gardner Minshew and Ryan Fitzpatrick discussion, along with a bunch of other stuff that we touched on, which is the recap of the game and the game balls and of course the tank for Trevor Lawrence and Drew Lock, the patience with Drew Lock. Guys, it was a pleasure. And Sayre, as always, we're going to have you on as much as you would like to. You are always a friend of the podcast, so you are welcome back any time.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me. It's always fun talking with you.
Yeah, we had some technical difficulties and everything, but we got through it. We managed it, and of course, Maddie, saddle up as always with the Manely Broncos podcast over on Spotify, iTunes, on iHeartRadio, and a bunch of all those other places where you can listen to the Manely Broncos podcast. So thank you guys so much, and we will catch you guys on a very next episode, hopefully here soon.
Saddle up.